Satellite Beach. How many people here are from Satellite Beach? Okay, so you got a good showing. Well, I just want to let you know how lucky you are to be from Satellite Beach, because they have got an absolutely awesome sustainability plan. And if you've never seen it, go onto their website and check out their sustainability plan. If you're not from Satellite Beach, I highly encourage you to also check it out, because wherever you're from, like I'm from Palm Bay, I'm using this as a model when I go meet with the city of Palm Bay and say, where's your sustainability plan, and let's make one that looks, as good as this one would be awesome. So I highly encourage you to look at it. So Satellite Beach was very gracious in helping us with our landscaping tour this year. They donated this space for all these sessions. And in return for that, they're asking us to promote how what we're doing helps them with their sustainability plan. So this is kind of running through that in order of impact on their sustainability plan. And so this is kind of like a super duper preview. Can y'all read this in the back? It might be a little hard. But basically, for their goals on natural resources improvement, we're doing that by helping them with a presentation right now. And a lot of the yards on the landscape tour this year are already certified by the National Wildlife Federation, which is a very good certification to get for a yard when you've got a lot of native plants. It means that you're helping the environment. So this is helping with that. We're also increasing public awareness here, which is another huge help on learning and teaching about invasive species. You're going to hear a little bit about that today. You'll hear more about that in the October presentation too, and how terrible invasive species are and how they're messing up native plants as well. And then we're also raising awareness about lagoon-friendly yards. And we're also helping out with the education on reducing water usage by using native plants, planting trees, and helping with the stormwater reduction. So these are goals right out of the Satellite Beach Sustainability Plan that by you being here, you're helping them achieve those goals that they've got. So thank you very much. And I think it's just an awesome example for the other cities that we're all from, right? So now, getting into Dr. Tallamy's presentation. Anybody familiar with this bird? Any birders in the room? This is what is called a gorgeous quetzal, and it's an endangered bird from Central America. Now, the reason it's endangered is because the food it eats is a highly specialized diet, and it's from the wild avocado tree, and most of those have been cut down in Central America. So to save that quetzal bird, we have to put back those wild avocado trees. To save this jaguar, and his photography is just awesome, to save this jaguar, we must plant a particular species of palms that make a particular type of palm nut, because that's the favorite food of peccaries, and that's the jaguar's required diet. Yeah, so it's a pretty complicated food web we've got going on here, but actually that's the norm rather than the exception, that most animals have a very specialized diet that they need, and it gets back to plants. So that's what we're going to keep talking about here till we get to our little piece of the world. So he said it always starts with plants. A lot of people think in the world that that's really only an issue in the tropics, but really it's an issue everywhere in the world. So we can't escape it just because we're not in the tropics. Here's another example. This beautiful phlox flower can only be pollinated by one type of insect. And it's not this guy, not this bee, because they have to be able to get their tongue down that tiny little corolla that's in the middle of that flower, that center. So if you want to get that pollinated, you have to have this specific type of day-flying sphinx moth. That's the only thing that's going to pollinate that flower. Okay? And the only thing that this guy can eat, the snowberry clearwing caterpillar, is coral honeysuckle, which happens to be a native plant. So even animals we don't think of as having specialized relationships with plants often do. Now this is a bird, you realize that Dr. Tallamy is from Delaware, so you're gonna get a lot of Delaware examples. This is the chickadee. How many people are familiar with the chickadee? So we've got some transplants here, not surprising that we have people. So he's making this example about the chickadee, but it really applies to all birds. So hang with me, just if you don't know what a chickadee is, it's a tiny little bird up north, makes a little call, chickadee, chickadee, chickadee. It's a really cute bird, but it's small. It's a small bird, okay? And everyone typically thinks chickadees are seed eaters, and they do eat seeds in the winter, but when they make babies, they feed their chicks insects, and not just any insect, it's really caterpillars. All day long, they're feeding these caterpillars back to the nuts for these babies. And that's really something very similar with most birds. Almost all birds are feeding their babies caterpillars. Why? Why is it that it's caterpillars? It could be because caterpillars are beautiful, and here's a lot of very beautiful caterpillars out there in the world. We've got the one down in the bottom right, the black swallowtail. You might have seen that one locally. It could be, but there's more to it than that, and why they're beautiful. It's because of all these little things listed in white on the left. It's because they're soft, they're large, they're nutritious, they're full of certain carotenoids and other proteins that the baby birds need. That's why caterpillars are preferred. There's a big old juicy one right here. So do we have any science people in the room? Because I always ask that. Okay, we've got a couple. I'm just going to tell you right now, I'm not a science person. I try to pronounce this stuff, but give me a little grace, okay? You lost the mic. Did I lose the mic? Yeah. Thanks for letting me know. Is that better? No? Oh dear. That means we're going to have a battery issue.
We can hear you pretty well.
Yeah, I got a soccer mom voice. I got a soccer mom voice, so worst case I can yell, okay? That's not a problem. Okay, so back to the science. So essential carotenoids are only made by plants. And I don't have a clue what this is telling us, other than it's very important. Okay, well, let's get to the important part. I knew the science people would get it. These are the types of carotenoids, okay? And you can see they all come from plants. They are all coming from plants. So why do birds need carotenoids? Because all these things, when they're developing as baby birds, are not going to happen if they don't get those carotenoids in their diet. It's going to improve their sexuality, it's going to provide antioxidants, stimulate the immune system, color vision, etc. So it is absolutely critical that baby birds get the carotenoids. So chickadees can't make their own carotenoids, they have to get them indirectly from plants. So, it's got to get them from something that can eat plants, right? And that is insects. And you'll see over here on the left, see if my little color things go work. Hope I don't mess it up here. Oh yeah, there it is. So this guy on the far left, that's a caterpillar, that green, gooey looking thing. They have the most carotenoids of anything, right? I wish over on the right, the ants and the roaches had more carotenoids, but they don't. They're very low, so too bad. That's just too bad.
It's not working again, just so you know.
Okay, well, I'm going to put it down then, because it's just a pain to hold it. Okay, that's okay anyway. Okay, so for most birds, caterpillars are not optional. There's no chickadees where there's not enough caterpillars. How many caterpillars does it take to make a nest of chickadees? You're going to be amazed. Lots and lots. So a pair delivers food every 3 minutes. That's 30 caterpillars in 27 minutes. They forage from daylight to dusk. It's a lot of work on these poor parents. And they bring all kinds of species. 17 species were just what Dr. Tallamy observed in his little period here. So what this is saying is that it takes 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to raise a nest of baby birds. Isn't that amazing?
Yes.
That is a lot. Now think about that. That chickadee is 8 times smaller than this red-bellied woodpecker, which we have here, right? So what that means is the red-bellied woodpecker's babies need even more caterpillars than the chickadee's babies because they're bigger. So pretty much say it's 10,000 caterpillars to raise a little nest of baby birds, constantly eating. And these are some birds that we actually have around here: cardinals, blue jays. All these are bigger than chickadees. They're about the size of the woodpeckers. So again, that example still applies, you know, in terms of how many more caterpillars it's gonna take for all these birds to raise a nest of baby birds. So that's a lot. And by the way, hummingbirds also survive 80% on insects, which I did not know. I mean, that's a lot of insects for the hummingbirds. They need them too. So in fact, 96% of all terrestrial bird species rear their young on insects, mostly caterpillars. So this is a list of all the types of birds that need caterpillars for their babies. It's basically 96% of all birds need them. So you don't have to be able to read the list to know that. So, no insects, no baby birds. This is a pretty sad slide because on the left, that picture is a picture of a bird nest where all that was available to the baby birds was bird seed. And the baby birds died because they can't live on bird seed. Now, as we started out saying, chickadees eat bird seed. There's a lot of people who like to put out bird seed. Putting out bird seed is not a bad thing, especially in the winter. But when it's baby bird season, we ask people don't put out as much bird seed because the baby birds cannot get by on bird seed, right? They've got to have the caterpillars, the bugs, and the insects. So just something to kind of be a little bit aware of that I learned a lot about too. So what types of landscapes are capable of producing 9,000 caterpillars for one little nest of baby birds? That's a lot, right? That's a lot to have to put out. To answer this question, we're going to get back full circle to where we started from about specialized relationships between insects and plants. So plants don't want to be eaten, right? That's not their goal in life. Plants have a defense chemistry that's very specialized, more specialized than any group of animals on Earth. How do insects eat plants? How does this happen? Well, they specialize on only a few types of plants. So 90% of the insects that eat plants develop and reproduce with a very specialized history, right? This isn't going to change in our lifetime. This took like millions of years to happen. So our little lifetimes are not going to make a big change on that. But we all know the story of the monarch caterpillar, right? Everybody's heard about the monarch caterpillars and how they are completely dependent on milkweeds because that's their plant. That's all they want to eat when those caterpillars are trying to get fat and juicy for the birds. They've got to have those. But the milkweeds are very toxic because they have this cardiac glycoside stuff. And their other defense mechanism is the sticky latex sap. So if you ever broke a stem and you see that white stuff, that's actually poisonous. If it gets on the mandibles, the jaws of a monarch caterpillar, it glues them shut. Okay, so the caterpillar's got to know not to be messing around with that white sticky stuff, right? So how does that happen? How does it get around that issue? And if you really watch one sometime, It's just fascinating because it'll start at the outside of the leaf and it'll eat its way inward. And if it actually runs into any of that sticky stuff, it'll back off. It'll know to back off and say, oh, danger, danger, and it backs off real quick. So the upside of specialization is the monarchs can eat a plant protected by that sticky latex substance, but that's all they can eat, right? So we've heard about the monarch's plight. Really, it gets back to all the milkweeds are getting wiped out, and that's the only thing they can eat, right? So it's absolutely fascinating, and we said that's their specialized diet. Monarchs have declined by 96% since 1976. That's because the milkweeds have declined by 96%, and that's the only thing they can eat. You can come on in and sit down if you'd like. We won't bite. And he's going to make the case here that pretty much that's the same with all caterpillars. And we can actually build a landscape that helps support what the caterpillars want, okay? We know they don't want birdseed. We know what they don't want. So now he's saying, let's follow this nest of white-eyed vireos. That, again, is probably a northern bird. I've not heard of that, but it's a northern thing. It's very interesting, though, because here's all the types of caterpillars they brought back and the plant that the caterpillars that came from and were eating. So, for instance, this blinded sphinx caterpillar came from a black cherry tree. This caterpillar came from the viburnum. So, I mean, he was actually tracking all this. This guy is really amazing that he does all this super science. And he goes on here, this one came from a sycamore, this one came from the grape, this one came from a black cherry, spicewood, a black cherry, and this was just everybody being cozy. Because you know they're eating well. If they're getting all these caterpillars, they're obviously developing, getting nice and fat and happy and becoming great little birds. So now he's going to go through and make a case for which type of plants support which type of caterpillars. Here we've got the black walnut, and it supports these caterpillars here. That's all these caterpillars are going to eat, the black walnut. This is a native maple, supports these guys. And this is a native elm and the type of caterpillars they support. So 90% of insects that eat plants only eat the plants with which they co-evolved. And again, this started way before us, a long, long time ago. These are just a few of the caterpillars that come off an oak tree. And what you'll see is the oak tree is the hero of the story because they support the most caterpillars of anything. So they've got over 500 species that they can support. So it's not just birds that need insects and caterpillars, it's all these guys. And even though we don't like some of these guys to be in our house or yard, they're all a very important part of the food chain. And if any one of them in particular disappeared, it would disrupt the food chain for the animal world. So we don't really want that to happen. 25% of a red fox's diet is insects. I was kind of surprised to hear that, and this is a really great fact. 23% of a black bear's diet is insects. During a forest tent caterpillar outbreak in Michigan, individual black bears were eating 25,000 caterpillars a day.
Wow.
Now, I don't know how they figured that out. I was kind of curious, but that is a lot of caterpillars, and they probably single-handedly helped with this outbreak and get it under control. So a world without insects is a world without diversity. But we're losing the insects, and there's a lot of studies about that. Y'all have probably heard about that since the majority of the room knows Tallamy. Then you probably heard that that's a thing that's happening. We're losing our insects. And what's happening to the species that rely on those insects, we're going to lose them too, the birds. So there's so many bird species at near risk of extinction, and it's because they don't have the food that they need. Okay? You have any Audubon people in here? Yep, so you guys already know this probably, but I just thought that was pretty interesting. Now, a lot of people argue, why can't the parks take care of the problem? Why can't we create more parks and the problem will go away? Well, when you take a really big section of large habitat, like at the top, and you shrink it down to a little park, even though that little park is really nice, it can't handle the changes that are gonna happen environmentally. And this is a great slide to demonstrate that, and the great example I could come up with here is hurricanes, right? Because we're all familiar with those. So if you have a really big natural habitat, it can withstand some hurricane damage, a few trees down, a little bit of disruption. But if you only have a park the size of this room, and a hurricane comes through and you get a couple major trees down, that's gonna have a much bigger impact, that's the pinkish line on the bottom, much bigger impact to that habitat and to the wildlife in that smaller area. So, unfortunately, that's not the answer. So our natural areas are not large enough, and the other thing that we're fighting is invasive plants. So we've introduced 3,300 species. This is the really horrid one, the kudzu stuff that just like takes over. And those native species, a lot of people are like, well, they're green, they're great, let it happen. No, what they're doing is they crowd out the native plants, and there's not local native wildlife that wants that non-native plant, right? It wants the native plant that's struggling underneath there to survive. So dealing with that is the other big issue we're trying to work on. So we can measure what happens when we replace native plant communities with plants outside our food webs, i.e. those invasive plants. This is a great little example. So he created this 12 by 12 experiment where you get to decide what you want in your 12 by 12 piece of property here. You could put a white oak in there, and as we already know, spoiler, the oaks are the heroes, right? So the oak tree, and he was at our height, my height-ish, one day he could observe 410 caterpillars at his height on a white oak. So all these numbers are his height in one day, not even going up, you know, if it was a really big tree. And it doesn't look defoliated at all. It looks just fine and healthy. You could put a black cherry in your 12 by 12 spot. It's also a great guy, supports 239 caterpillars. And anyone heard of the Tallamy pear up north and would admit it, that they've heard of this tree? Not the hero, okay? Completely not the hero. Well, this guy supports one caterpillar, okay? Kind of pathetic. And the burning bush, also not a native, supports 4 caterpillars. So, if what you could decide to put in your 12 by 12 piece of land, here's what you would be making a choice on how much wildlife to support by what you put in that little piece of land. Now, this is the Callery pear. You can tell it's a northern kind of tree in full bloom, and this is why it was so popular, because it's so gorgeous when it's blooming. But what happens is all those seeds and blooms blow across the street and created this invasive wasteland. It is now on the invasive plant list. And I mean, you can hear Dr. Tallamy go off about this because he hates this tree with passion. So that's his hot button, that tree. So we get to land ownership is more than a privilege, it's a responsibility. And we're getting down to our little yards here pretty soon. So which plants should we be sure to have in our landscape? Well, he and his team did the research for us. This is what's so great. This is a plant list, and I'll show you the website on the next slide, where you can actually plug in your zip code, and it will tell you the plants in this order, highest to lowest, which support the most number of caterpillars and insects. So way up here in the top, it was my button there, up here in the top left corner, there's Quercus is our oak tree, hero of the day. They support the most. Way down here at the bottom right, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, lots of zeros, right? So you can actually put in your zip code. Here's the two websites, and I'll show this again at the end, that you can put that zip code in there no matter where you are in Brevard County, and you'll get that list to help you figure out how to support the most possible wildlife in your yard, which is awesome. So we also want to help create foraging hubs, because the more we can do that, the more we can help wildlife. Now, this is kind of old school, I realize, but if you've flown on an airplane in the last 20 years, maybe, you've probably seen this map in the back of the seat in front of you of here's all the routes and all the layovers you could hope to have, and et cetera, et cetera. But what he thought was interesting is you could think of each of these red lines as a particular place where a bird's going to forage for their food. So he's saying, why hunt on oaks, cherries, willows? Because that's where the food is, right? We just went over that. Oaks are the hero of the day. So the birds are going to know to go after these guys in the top left corner. That's what they're going for. They know this. They don't have to, read a book to figure it out. So if we only plant 5%, the top 5% that supports insects, we can help 73% of the caterpillar species, which I thought was pretty awesome. On the flip side, you could plant a landscape using 95% native plants and support a lot less native insects. But go for the big hit, right? Go for the top ones. Okay, so here we go. Oaks are the heroes, 557s. Ginkgo, another one he doesn't like, 5 species. So let's not do that. Native prunus, 456 species. This guy I never heard of, no species. Must be a northern kind of plant. There's another non-native, 2 species. And another native, 103. So he's asking us to think about our yards and the plants that we put in them, and think about the plants in your yards as if they were bird feeders, because in essence they are, everything you plant. So you can have lots of bird feeders in your yard, right? Trees and whatnot. They can be, you can have a whole lot of them, right? Or you can have just a few. They can be full because they're natives and they're oaks, or you can have empty bird feeders that are basically non-native trees, not supporting caterpillars and wildlife. We're not fooling the birds if we're not planting the right trees, because as we saw on that map, and this one as well with the red lines, the birds are going to go for the right plants. They know. So here's another example in somebody's yard. The birds knew to go after all these native plants, and they followed them. Dr. Tallamy followed these birds around to where they foraged, and even though there were lots of other trees around, you can see all these other trees, these were the ones the birds went to for their food. They didn't go to all these other ones around here because they knew that. So compared to native landscapes, the yards that don't have native plants have introduced, or non-native plants, produce far fewer caterpillars, less likely to have breeding chickadees, smaller nests, fewer eggs, less likely to survive, and delayed maturation, because they've got to have the food they need, right?
We have another problem here too. We have Patrick Air Force Base, this huge area that has nothing good growing in it, maybe a few oak trees around the side. And then, there's all the neighborhood south. I live 8 blocks south of it, so I know that there's very few birds that go over my house.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And that's what I attribute that to.
Well, and we'll talk about that some at the end too when we get into Q&A, because I know when I moved into my house, there wasn't hardly any birds there, but there was a mowed lawn. So you got those mowed, we're gonna get to that coming up here. The mowed lawns are not on his list things that support wildlife. So we'll cover that in just a couple minutes. But here this shows there's actually a point here at the 25% line. By having more non-native plants, you're actually decreasing the replacement population of birds and wildlife in your yard. So you're not even supporting what's already there, it's going to be declining. That's kind of scary. And in his yard, this one he's measuring everything in, he had 51 species migrate through his yard alone. That's a lot. So you don't have to save biodiversity for a living, but he's asking us to think about saving it where we live. The organisms, again, we've talked about this before, have no evolutionary history together. They haven't had time to develop that specialization. Again, we're talking about millions of years, way past our lifetime. It's probably not gonna happen. So if these specialized relations disappear, then the species are going to disappear. How many species do we need? Pretty much all of them. I know, this is a real sad looking guy. So that biodiversity of what's in what we have the ability to plant in our yards equals providing ecosystem services. Now we've done a pretty good job of making a little bit of a mess here on Earth, right? The thing, I like his quote here, but he says, here's the key. This is how big the Earth was when humans appeared 2 million years ago. And this is how big it is today, the same size. How can we take more and more each day from the Earth if the Earth itself isn't growing? That's pretty powerful. The life they used to be in this landscape is now gone with the wind, because that mowed yard isn't doing it. And what he's saying here is 85% of the U.S. east of the Mississippi is privately owned. So that's our backyards here, east of the Mississippi. And we've got to raise the bar on what we want our yards to do, to support life, sequester carbon, manage water, enrich the soil, and support the pollinators. 80% of all plants are pollinated by animals, and we can't lose them. We're not talking about good stewardship, we're talking about essential stewardship. So if your property does not generate everything you need, you have to borrow it from someplace else. And guess what? You can't borrow it from these guys, because there's nothing happening here. There's no food webs, there's no pollinators, it's actually detrimental to the watershed. So if our past criteria for choosing landscapes was what's on the left here, we chose it based on decorative values, screening, anchoring, and focal points. That's what we used to, we all grew up this way. This is how we want our landscape to look, all pretty and flowery and all that. What he's suggesting is, let's change that so that we think about our landscapes a little differently. We can still have some decoration on the left, okay? We're not trying to get rid of that. But let's also balance that with what our plants and our landscape adding for food web value, make it a little more balanced instead of completely imbalanced, which is how we pretty much grew up here. So what does a biodiverse, friendly neighborhood look like? Well, we could create corridors connecting natural areas, reduce the area we mow, and start transitioning from non-native ornamentals to more native ornamentals. Now this is an example of a house with a few trees around it that probably everybody started with here. And what he's saying is if you just planted some trees around the edge of this property, you've in essence created a lot of livable food for your wildlife in that yard. And if a bunch of people got together and did that, look how you've just created a corridor here. And you still have your little piece of mowed yard for the kids and the dog to play. You haven't really given everything up completely, but you've created a little bit more space for that wildlife. If we replanted, all of us east of the Mississippi, half of the area we now mow, that would be 20 million acres, which is greater than the sum of all these national parks. Isn't that amazing? Just half of what we mow right now, and we mow a lot. So, so a couple examples here that I thought were great from his presentation. A lot of these are from out in Texas. Anybody been to Texas and seen their wildflowers are awesome out there. They do a lot in the medians of the road. This is not a good example of a yard, but what he's saying here is, would you rather have this yard or this kind of yard? This was an example of a side yard a woman had where she realized she never even went out to the side yard, so she just made it into a wildflower meadow. This is another roadside example I like. I'm probably from Texas would be my guess. Yeah. This is an example of a corporate landscape, and he's saying, what a wasted opportunity. Is this supposed to be something the employees go out and enjoy at lunchtime? Or would this be something employees would like to go out and enjoy at lunchtime? And another example of a street lined with trees, I love that. So again, we get back to thinking about would we choose to plant in our yard. Does your yard have to be 100% native? No. But I love this picture. This picture really hit home for me because he's saying, think of every non-native plant in your yard as a statue because it's not helping support any wildlife. So that croton that I've had at my house for 25 years is basically a statue. It's not supporting any wildlife, no caterpillars. I just must like the color of it because it's my statue. And so if you look at your yard that way, it made me think about my yard a little bit differently, like how many statues do I really want or need? And you just think about that because if you're gonna have plants in your yard, it'd be nice if they were there for some other purpose besides just statue observing, right? Besides having this array of statues in your yard. So I really like that. It kind of hit home with me. How do you know when you succeeded getting enough native plants in your yard? Well, here's the evidence. You'll see some chewed on leaves, especially on those oak trees, because we know they support so many species, right? I love to go out and look at this live oak I planted and I can look at this height, because it's only about 10 feet tall now. And there's so much chewing on these leaves, and yet when you stand back, the tree looks just fine. So it's able to support all these things chewing on its leaves and still keep thriving. You'll also see, you'll also see a few weird bugs you might not have seen in your yard before, like this guy and this guy down here. And most important, you'll probably hear some baby birds out there chirping because they're hungry, because they need 10,000 caterpillars, right? So they're out there squawking all the time for more baby caterpillars. And once you're hearing them in your yard, you know that you're supporting the caterpillar population that mom and dad need to get to those baby birds. It's a lot. It's 10,000 caterpillars. Now his last example here, I think is very good and will hit home for us. So we can only save nature if we learn to live with it. Homeowners in Florida accidentally saved the Atala butterfly. Does anyone have Atala butterflies in their yard? Yeah. Awesome!
Because we planted cooties.
All right. Well, do you know how that came to be? Because here's the Atala butterfly chrysalis and whatnot, but 90% of the insects, the Atala butterfly is a specialist. It only eats one thing. This guy, the kunti. Thank you. It turns out that kunti roots were used by Native Americans as a source of starch. So the Native Americans weren't the problem. However, they taught the settlers, and the settlers wiped out all the kuntis. So we had none.
Well, they also used it as a food source for flour in World War I and during the Depression.
Right.
Because there was no one raising grain.
Yeah, exactly.
So
And that's,
that
again,
was
from the
another
root
use.
side, they have a huge root ball down there. Yeah. If you ever try to dig one. Pardon me?
C-O-O-N-T-I?
How do you spell it? C-O-O-N-T-I-E. Coontie. So, attempts to list the Atala as an endangered species failed because nobody could find one for years down in South Florida. But then, to save the day, residential landscapers discovered coonties. And they started using it, and it is a gorgeous landscaping plant because you never have to trim it, it stays the same height, it's always green, you know, it rarely looks terrible. If it looks terrible, there's something going on. So they restored the population without even trying. That's like, what a success story, but we really can't be relying on that kind of a success story overall. So, fortunately, nature is forgiving. She'll give us one more chance. The theory about how plants and insects interact, as well as Dr. Tallamy's research, suggests that all plants are not created equal when it comes to supporting food webs. And I think that's what he's done a great job of explaining here with this presentation. He's got a few books out. The one on the left is his book. We have a few copies in the extra room back in the back there, because you can pretty much only get his books used now on Amazon, and Martha's been doing a good job. So there's a few of those back there if you'd like to purchase one of those. This again is the websites that I was telling you about, where you can go and find by zip code what works for you. So no excuses, even if you live way down in Palm Bay, I could figure this out. You can also get this off of the FNPS, the Florida Native Plant Society website, also has the whole zip code thing going as well. So, we are also super blessed here in Brevard County to have all these native nurseries. So we are so fortunate. I was talking to a lady from Jacksonville. She said they have 0 native nurseries in Jacksonville, and they have to mail order everything. And we are so spoiled here because we had Sharon and Brent Nolan, who started Maple Street Natives, and many of these came from people who worked there that set up their own nurseries there. So, I mean, take advantage of this. You don't have to mail order your native plants like Jacksonville has to do. See, that's why yeah. And I would also encourage you on your way out at the Conradina table to sign up for our newsletter, because this is part of our newsletter every month. It's also on our website. We keep this up to date, because nurseries sometimes come and go, and that way you've got the best information. Also in the newsletter, all the links work, so you can link right to the nursery website, which is really cool. So that way you can get there faster. Okay, everybody got their pictures? Hey, can you hang on just a sec? We're almost done. So Linda, did you want to do this, or you want me to keep going? Okay.
This is the Conradina chapter of Florida. We are the Conradina chapter of Florida. And I would like to also mention that the Florida Native Plant Society has a mission. That mission is threefold. And the way I remember it is CPR, conservation, protection and preservation, and restoration. That's the way I read it. Because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to restore old Florida here. We're trying to provide, an environment that we can be, happy with, content with, beautiful to look at, and the quiet, the peacefulness that it brings to you in your backyard, if you want. The Conradina chapter serves South Brevard. We have a northern chapter also, if you're closer to the north end. We hold monthly meetings. Our meetings have moved because we have grown, and they're now at the First Church of Nazarene. It's actually across right across from FIT on Babcock. It's a pretty big place, and we're going to be helping them with their native garden. We meet the second Monday of the month, and it's from 6 to 8. But we start at 5:30 for socializing hour. And we bring goodies in and some lemonade and Kool-Aid, whatever you want to call it. If you want water, you have to bring your own. Next slide. So this is our 2023 Florida Natives Tour. These are our sponsors. The City of Satellite Beach, thank goodness. Wow, we are just in keeping with their sustainability action plan. We just love them. They are the top in Brevard for sustainability. If you live in the City of Satellite Beach, they're going for it. They got it. They have it down pat. They have counties seeking them out for, you know, how to do that. Native butterfly flowers and changing greenery. Two very nice nurseries. They can help you with building and designing a plan for your yard or your gardens. The pine tree sponsors, Rockledge and Fort Print. Walters Viburnum sponsors are Island Garden Club, the Rose Mallow Farms, and Wet, Wild and Wet. What more could you want? Our upcoming events, Native Landscaping 101. That's next month, okay? Again, we're gonna have it on Sunday, and we're gonna have one the following Monday night, just as, you know, as we normally do. So that's Sunday, October 8th from 2 to 4, and Monday, October 9th. You should have a card. The reserved spots have a card on their seat listing this, so you can take it home with you and put it on your calendars. Very important, when we go over to Nazarene, our first official month at Nazarene for our general meeting, that's gonna be the legal aspects of Florida-friendly landscaping. This attorney, Barbara Stage, is coming in to tell us how to deal with HOAs. Yeah, she has it down pat, and she helps a lot of homeowners. You know, a lot of them that are just building homes that would like to move in, but they don't like the ground. So, this is gonna be very interesting. She's agreed to come in and take this and present to us. We're very excited about this one, because it's right in keeping with our, you know, our first one, Doug Tallamy's presentation, the second one coming up, how to start a native garden, which a lot of you would like to know, right?
Yes.
Can I see hands? Who's starting a native garden? Come on, yeah, that's right. I would like for you to join us in our mission. Okay, and there's the meeting place. It's 2745 South Back Up. If you want to take a picture of that screen, you can.
And of course, the tour, October 14th, we have tickets in the other room. They're $5 cheaper on Eventbrite, but if you want a printed brochure, because some people like that printed brochure, we have them in the other room for you. Okay, questions? You're first.
I was actually gonna say the U.S. Extension Office also has a good list of the keystone plans.
Right.
Big things.
Right, and we're gonna talk about that a little bit next month on the Plan 101, because we've got that keystone list on our website for our landscape tour, so you can reference it there as well, of the Brevard Keystone Plan. Yeah.
You want to print that out and take it with you to the nursery. They know what the keystone plants are, but if you don't, it's better to become familiar with them before you go to the gardens, the nurseries, than afterwards.
Because then you can go check them out at fnps.org/plants.
Yes, ma'am.
Exactly.
That's right.
And you also wanna be careful to not be buying your native plants at the big box stores. Because they're gonna be probably sprayed with something, even though they say native. You really wanna be buying them at the native nurseries, where you know for sure they're in good shape.
The other thing we're gonna talk about next month is invasives. How do you take those out of your yard? Why do you look for them? What are they? So that is all encompassed in the next presentation next month. And again, it's gonna be on Sunday, just like this one. And it's already full. I mean, well, it's not full, but we are at 100% capacity, reserved seats on that one already. And the room only holds 150.
No, we're at 90 out of 145.
Excuse me.
Okay. Don't discourage me. But we're also, as Jamie just reminded me, putting these, like, we're on YouTube right now. So if perchance you can't come, these are going to be on YouTube. So you can always do, you can go back and look at this again, you know, reference points you want again. She's our social media whiz kid, because we are not. So feel free to check us out on social media with that. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Just to be clear, you're saying that most of the plants at Home Depot or Lowe's or Wall World are not native?
Well, here's the deal, they might be native, but they were not grown necessarily here. They might have been grown at the big box store, major central location in Ocala or something. The closer you can get to something grown here, the more successful it will be in your yard. Rockledge Gardens is coming on with a pretty good native section. I mean, that's why we sought them out as a sponsor. They are generally gonna have more local stuff. It's really the big box stores that we're
Also,
a little nervous
the
about.
box stores, they will
And a lot of weird stuff.
take it up by the roots, get into the frame, kill insects.
The pollinators, yeah.
So the caterpillars become toxic. So,
Yeah.
that's stayed the plant for a long time.
I'd like to think that's gonna change someday, but for the short run, again, you're blessed with a list of native nurseries. And though they're small businesses, the more we can support them, the better, you know? Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Regarding the bird feeders, could you just recap, is it, you're suggesting we put bird feeders into backyards?
Well, certain times of the year, like the winter, is what someone told me is a good time to have bird seed, but during the spring, when the baby birds are out chirping, it's best to kind of put that away or limit the bird seed. Ideally, what'll happen, and this has happened in my yard, as your native plants mature, you're providing more of the food they need from the native plants, the berries, the caterpillars, the bugs. You'll see all that happening, and the birds will actually prefer less of the bird seed. But it's gonna take a while to get there, so you're gonna have to kind of help with that limiting of it, to encourage them to go find that, because like all of us, fast food's faster, great, but not necessarily better for you. Yeah, good question, though, I got that last time too.
It's like going through a drive-through. Yeah. Think of it like that. Would you rather eat drive-in food or make it at home? Think it out.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Is there a way to balance a ratio where you can sustain a pollinator garden and take care of the birds without having the birds eat all your caterpillars?
Well, ideally, if you just grow, we'll let Jamie answer that, because she's the expert here.
So, butterflies lay hundreds of eggs. 10% at most are supposed to get their wings. So the caterpillars are primarily there to be food for the baby birds. And I know it can be heart-wrenching to somebody that is planting a butterfly garden to save the butterflies, but they don't need saving. They're part of the web, and everything works together. Even humans, we're part of the web.
What a great answer.
We're like the bad part of the web. So if you create a habitat, you're doing everything that you can for the butterflies, the caterpillars, the birds, the bees, the wasps, raccoons, possums, everything.
Yeah. I'll add to that real quick, because I called up my son whining about my monarch caterpillars kept disappearing because the birds kept getting them. And he goes, well, Mom, what do you expect? It's a buffet out there. I was like, yeah, you're right, that's kind of the point. So yeah. So any other questions? Well, thanks so much for coming and the resources at this table in the other room, and I'll be down there selling
It's
tickets.
close to the far corner in the other room, the home room. And there's also the tickets for the garden tour that everybody
Okay.
I've been ready. I don't have any grass. I have sunshine and autumn grass. And I have one little lawn on the side of my house. But it's getting taken over by the pneumonia. Susan chop on anything,